My dad's passing was sudden. One minute he was there, telling me another one of his corny jokes. The next, gone. The reading of the will was just a formality, I thought. Dad always said family was everything. But the name on the final page wasn't mine. It was hers. The scent of lilies and old wood still clings to the memory of that day. It was a gray Tuesday, the kind where the sky seems to sigh along with you. My father, Arthur, had been gone for 3 weeks, and the formality of reading his will was upon us. It felt surreal sitting in the lawyer's plush office, the silence punctuated only by the nervous cough of my stepmother, Carol. Carol. Even the name felt foreign on my tongue, a constant reminder of the woman who swept into my father's life a mere 5 years ago, after my mother passed. I'd tried to be accepting, for Dad's sake. He deserved happiness, especially after losing Mom. But Carol, well, she was a piece of work. Always perfectly coiffed, dressed in expensive clothes that somehow always looked a little too tight, and with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. My brother Mark was there too. Mark, the golden boy. Always had been. He was 3 years older than me, and while I worked diligently, often juggling 2 part-time jobs through college and beyond, Mark seemed to effortlessly coast through life, Dad always there to catch him whenever he stumbled. It wasn't that I resented Mark, not exactly. It was more a weary acceptance of the way things were. Dad had his favorites, and I'd long ago learned I wasn't it. Mr. Henderson, the lawyer, cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. He was a kindly older man, his face etched with years of dealing with family dramas just like this one, I imagined. He began to read, his voice a low drone that seemed to amplify the tension in the room. The usual clauses about funeral arrangements, charitable donations, all the standard stuff. Then came the part we were all waiting for, the distribution of assets. Our family home, the place where Mark and I grew up, went to Carol. Not surprising. She'd lived there with Dad for the past 5 years. The small cabin by the lake, filled with so many happy memories of our childhood summers with Mom, also went to Carol. Okay, a little disappointing, but I could understand it. Maybe she and Dad had made memories there too. Then came the investment accounts, the stocks, the savings. Mr. Henderson read out the details, and my eyebrows shot up despite myself. Every single penny was going to Carol. Not a trust fund for Mark and me, not even a small inheritance. Just Carol. I glanced at Mark. He looked as stunned as I felt, his mouth slightly agape. Carol, on the other hand, maintained her composure, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips. Is there a mistake?" Mark finally stammered, breaking the heavy silence. Mr. Henderson looked down at the document, then back up at us. "No, Mark. This is the final will and testament of your father, Arthur Thompson. All assets are to be bequeathed to his wife, Carol Thompson." My mind was racing. This couldn't be right. Dad wasn't a fool. He knew Carol hadn't been around forever. He knew Mark and I were his children, his flesh and blood. Had Carol somehow manipulated him? Was he not in his right mind when he signed this? "But what about us?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "Mark and I? We're his children." Carol finally spoke, her voice smooth and laced with a hint of what I could only describe as pity. "Arthur loved you both very much, of course. But he felt I would need the financial security more." "Need it more? I worked full-time as a kindergarten teacher, barely scraping by in this economy, while Carol spent her days getting manicures and attending fancy luncheons with her equally polished friends. Mark had always struggled to hold down a job, relying heavily on Dad's financial support even now, at 35. How could Dad possibly think Carol needed the money more than us?" "That doesn't make any sense," Mark said, echoing my thoughts. "Dad always said he wanted to provide for us, for his grandchildren someday." Carol sighed, a dramatic, put-upon sound. "Arthur changed his mind, dear. People do. He wanted to make sure I was taken care of." She reached over and patted Mark's hand, the gesture feeling utterly insincere. Mr. Henderson, sensing the rising tension, interjected. There is a clause in the will, however, regarding the house. Carol, your late husband, stipulated that while the house is yours, he would like for Mark to be able to continue living there for the time being, if he so wishes, rent-free. Mark looked slightly mollified by this, but I was still reeling. The house? That was it? A place for Mark to live, rent-free, in the house that was now entirely Carol's? What about me? Was I just supposed to disappear? The meeting wrapped up shortly after that, with Mr. Henderson explaining the next steps for probate. Carol stood up, her demeanor shifting from sympathetic widow to something almost triumphant. Well, she said, her voice bright, I'm sure we all need some time to process this. Mark, dear, you know you're welcome to stay as long as you need. She turned to me, her smile tight. And you, sweetie, I'm sure you'll be just fine. You're a strong, independent woman. The sweetie dripped with condescension. I just nodded, unable to find my voice. I felt a knot of anger and betrayal tightening in my chest. Dad was gone, and it felt like he'd taken a part of me with him, leaving me with nothing but questions and a bitter taste in my mouth. The drive home was a blur. I replayed the scene in the lawyer's office over and over in my head, trying to make sense of it. Had Dad really intended this? Had Carol somehow influenced him? The more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that something wasn't right. Over the next few weeks, I tried to talk to Mark about it, but he seemed strangely accepting. He was relieved about the house situation and kept saying that maybe Dad had his reasons. I couldn't shake the feeling that Carol had something to do with this. One evening, I decided to go over to the house. It felt strange walking in without Dad there, the silence amplifying his absence. Carol was in the living room, sorting through some of Dad's belongings. Oh, hi, sweetie, she said, looking up with that same fake smile. Just going through some things? Want some tea? No, thank you, I said, my voice flat. I just wanted to look around. I wandered through the house, each room holding memories of Dad, of Mom, of a time when things felt whole. I found myself in Dad's study, a room that had always been his sanctuary. His old leather armchair sat in its usual spot, his desk still cluttered with papers and books. As I ran my hand over the worn surface of his desk, my fingers brushed against a small locked drawer I'd never noticed before. Curiosity piqued. I tried to open it, but it was firmly locked. I glanced over my shoulder. Carol was still in the living room, humming softly to herself. An idea sparked in my mind. Dad had always kept a spare key to everything in a small, antique music box on the bookshelf. I scanned the shelves, my heart pounding slightly, and there it was. I carefully lifted the lid and rummaged through the trinkets inside, and there it was, a small tarnished brass key. My hands trembled as I inserted the key into the lock of the drawer. It clicked open. Inside, nestled among some old photographs and letters, was a small, worn notebook. My father's familiar handwriting covered the pages. I sat down in his armchair, my heart pounding in my chest, and began to read. The notebook was a journal, filled with Dad's thoughts and feelings over the past few years. He wrote about missing Mom, about his health concerns, and about his relationship with Carol. As I flipped through the pages, my eyes landed on an entry from about 6 months before he passed. My breath hitched as I read the words. Carol has been insistent. She keeps talking about her financial security, about how her previous husband left her with nothing. She's been pressuring me to change my will. I love her. I truly do. But something about this feels wrong. I've always wanted to provide for my children, for Emily and Mark. They deserve everything. I felt a surge of anger towards Carol. She had manipulated him. She had preyed on his love and his vulnerability. But I kept reading, my fingers turning the fragile pages. A few weeks later, another entry. I had a long talk with Carol today. She was very upset, accused me of not trusting her. She cried. Said she felt like I didn't truly love her if I wasn't willing to secure her future. I gave in. I changed the will, leaving everything to her. I hope I've done the right thing. I still feel uneasy about it. My blood ran cold. He hadn't wanted to do it. He had been pressured, manipulated. Carol's sweet facade crumbled away, revealing the calculating, selfish woman beneath. I continued reading, hoping to find some explanation, some reassurance that Dad still cared for us. And then I found it, tucked away at the very back of the notebook, a sealed envelope with my name on it. My hands shook as I carefully opened it. Inside was a letter, written in Dad's familiar scrawl. My dearest Emily, if you're reading this, then I'm no longer with you. I'm so sorry for what you must be feeling. I also know you're probably wondering about the will. Please believe me when I say that leaving everything to Carol was not my wish. She convinced me it was the right thing to do. She made me feel like I was being selfish if I didn't. But I couldn't leave you and Mark with nothing. That's why I'm writing this. A few years ago, your mother and I set up a separate account, a trust fund for both of you. It's not a huge amount, but it's something. Carol doesn't know about it. I wanted to make sure you were both taken care of, no matter what. The details are enclosed in this letter. Please, Emily, promise me you'll look after yourself and your brother. And please know that I loved you both more than words can say. With all my love, Dad. My eyes filled with tears. Relief washed over me, followed by a fresh wave of anger towards Carol. She had tried to cut us out completely, but Dad, in his own way, had found a way to protect us. I looked back at the notebook, at the entries detailing Carol's manipulation. I felt a burning desire for justice. She couldn't get away with this. She couldn't just waltz in and take everything that should have been ours. I carefully placed the notebook and the letter back in the drawer, locking it. I knew what I had to do. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I walked out of the study, my face set in a determined expression. Carol was still in the living room, humming her cheerful tune. She looked up as I entered, her smile still firmly in place. "Everything all right, sweetie?" she asked. "Yes," I said, my voice calm but firm. "Everything is about to be very all right." I knew this was just the beginning. I had a secret weapon now, a truth that Carol didn't know I possessed. And I was going to use it. I was going to fight for what was rightfully ours. Dad might have been manipulated, but I wouldn't be. Carol had underestimated me, and that was a mistake she was going to regret. The game had just changed, and I was ready to play. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of quiet planning. I didn't let on to Carol that I knew anything. I acted as if I was still grieving, still trying to process the will. Mark, oblivious as ever, continued to live at the house, seemingly content with his rent-free arrangement. I contacted Mr. Henderson, the lawyer, under the guise of needing some clarification on the probate process. During our conversation, I casually mentioned that I had found some old documents of my father's that might be relevant. I didn't go into specifics, but I arranged a meeting to discuss them further. The day I went back to Mr. Henderson's office, I brought Dad's journal and the letter. I laid them out on his mahogany desk, the worn pages a stark contrast to the polished wood. Mr. Henderson listened intently as I explained everything, his expression shifting from polite interest to shock and then to a grim understanding. This changes things significantly, Emily," he said, his voice grave. "If your father was indeed coerced into changing his will, it could be contested." I nodded. "That's what I want to do. I want to contest it, Mr. Henderson cautioned me about the potential costs and the emotional toll of a legal battle, but seeing the determination in my eyes, he agreed to help. He explained the process, the evidence we would need, and the likelihood of success. The journal entries, especially the one where Dad explicitly stated his unease and feeling of being pressured, were strong evidence. The letter detailing the trust fund was the final piece of the puzzle. We decided to proceed cautiously. Our first step was to send a formal letter to Carol, informing her of our intent to contest the will based on potential undue influence. We didn't reveal the existence of the journal or the trust fund yet. We wanted to gauge her reaction. Carol's reaction, when it came, was exactly what I expected. Outrage. She called me, her voice shrill with indignation, accusing me of being greedy and disrespectful to Dad's memory. "How dare you, Emily!" she shrieked over the phone. "Your father loved me! He wanted me to be taken care of." "Did he, Carol?" I replied calmly, my voice low and steady. "Or did you convince him that was what he wanted?" There was a brief silence on the other end, a pregnant pause that spoke volumes. Then, her tone shifted, becoming softer, almost pleading. "Sweetie, why are you doing this? Can't we just talk? Maybe we can work something out." "There's nothing to talk about, Carol," I said, my voice hardening. "The will doesn't reflect my father's true wishes, and I intend to see that justice is done." I hung up before she could respond. The lawsuit began a few weeks later. It was a messy, drawn-out affair, just as Mr. Henderson had warned. Carol fought back fiercely, hiring a high-powered lawyer and painting herself as the grieving widow whose stepchildren were trying to steal her inheritance. The media, of course, got wind of it, and our family drama became public fodder. There were articles in the local paper, online forums buzzing with speculation, and even a brief mention on the evening news. It was humiliating and exhausting, but I refused to back down. During the discovery phase of the lawsuit, Carol was forced to answer questions under oath. Her carefully constructed facade began to crack under the pressure. She denied pressuring Dad, insisted that the will was his free and voluntary decision, but her answers were often evasive and contradictory. Then came the day when Mr. Henderson presented the journal entries as evidence. The courtroom was silent as he read aloud Dad's words, detailing Carol's insistence and his own feelings of unease. Carol's face, usually so meticulously made up, paled visibly. The dramatic turn came when Mark was called to testify. He had initially been hesitant, caught between his loyalty to me and his comfortable living situation in Carol's house. But after seeing the evidence and realizing the extent of Carol's manipulation, he finally understood. On the stand, Mark admitted that he had always felt Carol was a bit pushy when it came to Dad's finances. He recalled several instances where she had made comments about her previous husband's lack of financial planning and how she didn't want to end up in the same situation. He also testified that Dad had seemed increasingly stressed and unhappy in the months leading up to his death. The combination of Dad's journal entries and Mark's testimony was damning. Carol's lawyer tried to discredit the journal, arguing that it was just Dad's personal thoughts and not concrete proof of coercion. But the judge, a no-nonsense woman with a keen eye for deception, wasn't buying it. After weeks of testimony and legal wrangling, the judge finally delivered her verdict. She ruled in our favor, stating that there was sufficient evidence to suggest that Arthur Thompson had been unduly influenced by Carol Thompson when he signed his last will and testament. The will was deemed invalid. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. Carol sat there, her face a mask of disbelief and fury. Her lawyer immediately announced their intention to appeal, but I knew, deep down, that the fight was over. The truth had come out. The original will, the one Dad had before Carol came into his life, was reinstated. This meant that Mark and I would inherit the house, the lake cabin, and the majority of Dad's assets. Carol was left with nothing but the clothes on her back and the expensive jewelry Dad had bought her. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about justice for Dad, about honoring his true wishes. It was about exposing Carol for who she really was. The aftermath was complicated. Mark and I inherited the house, and he decided to stay there. We agreed to sell the lake cabin and split the proceeds. The investment accounts and savings were also divided between us. Carol moved out of the house, her departure as dramatic as her arrival had been. She sent me a venomous email, filled with accusations and threats, but I simply deleted it. I had no desire to engage with her further. The biggest surprise came a few weeks later, when I received a letter from Mr. Henderson. It was about the trust fund Dad had mentioned in his letter. It turned out to be a substantial amount of money, more than I had ever imagined. Dad had been more foresightful than I realized. The money provided a much-needed financial cushion for both Mark and me. Mark used some of his share to finally start his own small business, something he had always dreamed of doing. I used some of mine to pay off my student loans and put a down payment on a small house of my own. The experience changed me. It made me realize the importance of standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. It also taught me that appearances can be deceiving, and that sometimes the people closest to you are not who you think they are. My relationship with Mark also evolved. We had always been siblings, but going through this ordeal together forged a new bond between us. We talked more, confided in each other, and finally started to build a real adult relationship. As for Carol, I haven't seen or heard from her since the lawsuit. Part of me wonders what she's doing, where she's living. But honestly, I don't really care. She made her choices, and she had to live with the consequences. A few years have passed since then. Life has settled into a new rhythm. I'm still teaching kindergarten, a job I genuinely love. Mark's business is doing well. We both visit Dad's grave regularly, often bringing flowers from the garden he loved so much. Sometimes when I'm alone, I think about Carol. I don't feel anger anymore, just a sort of detached pity. She had tried to take everything, driven by greed and a lack of genuine connection. In the end, she lost it all.